Good morning, Bilal.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone who has joined us live on YouTube and who is following along on this amazing journey that we've prepared for you today. I am excited to be able to do this along with Bilal, which is going to essentially help a lot of people navigate the workers' compensation system. If you've received an email invitation, if you've received a SMS invitation to join our live webinar, there's a lot you're going to learn, and we're going to dive into today. For example, the key steps to how to protect your rights. The number one reason why we've decided to create this type of webinar for everyone. Obviously, you're an injured worker, so I don't even need to ask. It's for people who've been injured. Everybody who would have essentially clicked on this webinar, I want to assume, would have essentially gotten an injury at work or an illness at work that has landed you on this live webinar. We are going to try to help you understand what benefits you are entitled to within the California workers' compensation system. We want you to gain clarity. We want you to understand what the process is like for an injured worker. And this goes from the beginning to the finish of a claim within the system. And most importantly, what you're going to leave today is with the knowledge, the confidence, and peace of mind that is going to reassure you, am I doing the right steps? Am I going the right way? Answering those questions for you at the end with this live Q&A that we have set up for you at the end as well. And to make things even better, we're going to share some of the mistakes that you should not do. Some of these mistakes can cost people thousands of dollars. So before I go ahead and keep sharing my screen so you can see some of the slides that we have going on for you today, I would also like to take this moment to introduce none other than our co-host for this webinar and the mastermind behind it, to be honest with you. I would definitely like to leave the space available for Bilal to kind of introduce himself a little bit. I want you guys to get to know who's the person that's speaking up on some of these important elements that we're going to be including within this webinar. So without further ado, Mr. Kassam,
Thank you,
will
Carmen.
you please introduce yourself to those that are watching to us live on YouTube or on our website as well?
Of course. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bilal Qasim. I'm the managing partner and co-founder of Pacific Workers, the Lawyers for Injured Workers. We're an Oakland, well, I should say Bay Area-based law firm serving clients throughout most of California these days. I've
Yes.
been in workers' comp now for 15, 16 years, something like that. I got into it while I was a clerk in college. I had worked at an applicant, which is an injured worker representing law firm. I went off to college, law school, and then I came full circle. I represented employers and insurance companies on the defense side for a little bit. And then I realized I wasn't doing the Lord's work. Decided to change it up and actually represent people rather than insurance companies, giving back to my community and really serving everyone who's in need. And so I've spent almost the entirety of my legal career now representing people who have suffered injuries.
Right. And for those of you that don't know, Bilal and I actually host a podcast as well called Work Comp Talk, and you can find it on YouTube or any of your favorite platforms where you like to listen to your podcast. And I always bring this up in a lot of the episodes that we do end up recording, and that's we're lucky. We're lucky that Bilal not only knows and understands, and this is what his career choice has been to understand the workers' compensation system, but it's a blessing to have him had at some point in his career work on the defense side, which also kind of sheds light as to, hey, hint, hint, this is what we need to look out for because I've been on the other side and I know kind of like what the structure is. So I am beyond grateful that we have Bilal with us today. My name is Carmen Ramirez. I'll be your host for the rest of this webinar. I will be grilling down some amazing questions for Bilal. And I come from a background of community involvement. I've always been out in the community. I've worked in radio most of my life, and helping the community has been my number one goal in anything that I do. So, this again is allowing me to help those that need the help the most, which is the injured workers. And we're excited to get this started. I truly do hope that you guys take everything into a perspective of, okay, this is, could this be my case, could this not be my case, if I was in the situation, what's my ultimate outcome that I want to achieve for my claim, right? I guess everyone at some point wants to achieve a best outcome. You want to be able to know that you are getting the best treatment with your doctor, that you are entitled to so many rights, and that you're getting all of these rights. But one of the biggest things, Bilal, is a lot of people don't necessarily understand what their rights even are, right? Like there's a lot of people that don't even understand at what point can I be the one filing a workers' comp claim. So this webinar does include people that are essentially not at that level where they've already submitted a claim. Therefore, we want to take it from the beginning. And if that's you, then definitely pay attention to this. And if that's someone who's already halfway through their claim or in the beginning stages of their claim, bear with us. We will go through this super quick. And we just want to make this available for everyone at every point in their workers' comp claim. So um, I do want to share my screen so that you guys can follow along a little bit. So you will see Bilal and I in the little screens below, but we will, for the most part, start with our number one slide, which is who's eligible for workers' comp. And in this particular spot, you know, obviously in California, any worker who's injured on the job is entitled to workers' comp. However, there are times, and Bilal, maybe you can speak more to this. There's times when injured workers don't even know they're entitled to it. So I kind of wanted to ask you, can you shed a little bit of light onto why an injured worker wouldn't know that he or she is entitled to a workers' comp benefit?
I think it spawns a lot from who the employee is and what their experience is. I think most people go through their careers without actually having been injured at work, and so it's one of those benefits that's not really talked about all that frequently amongst coworkers. And also the employer side, the employers are really the people who are in control of delivering information to employees. And for the most part, workers' comp, it's something employers generally, I don't say they hate, but they frown. When you talk about expenses for employers, one of those big expenses, depending on your industry, is workers' compensation insurance. And in high risk industries, like construction, for example, insurance premiums can be really expensive. It's just like car accidents. The more accidents you're in, the more your premium goes up. And that's true for construction industry and many other industries where there's a high rate of injury. And so I think a lot of employers are reluctant to put workers' comp at the forefront and really inform employees about everything they're entitled to because of fear that maybe people are actually going to pursue the benefits. And from that perspective, I think it's a lack of information that really is the sole reason why people do not know that they're entitled to workers' compensation benefits. To piggyback on that, some people have employment issues that go along with their work that, really prevent them from getting benefits. And it's nothing that they're doing, it's their employer side. We see a lot of people who are misclassified as independent contractors rather than employees. And so when they're hurt at work, their employer tells them to, go put it on their own insurance or, take some time off and deal with it. Or, you know what, I'll pay you a little bit of money just to help you through, but go away. And I think a lot of people are put in a position where they don't have the time, the power, or the opportunity to really take advantage of the benefits that are available to them, even if they are legally entitled to them.
That's exactly what it is. You know, sometimes they get intimidated by a lot of their employers as well as to like, hey, don't worry about it. I'll pay your bills, but let's not even go through the system. You don't want to go through that, and they kind of get encouraged to do something else, and that is kind of like the number one mistake I would say. Along this webinar, we've also included the costly mistakes that you shouldn't do. So on this note, as to who's eligible for the workers' comp claim or for to file a workers' comp claim in California, the number one mistake that I would highly say is not reporting the injury. And I want to kind of pick your brain on this, Bilal. How many times has an injured worker come to you when they didn't submit the injury claim early enough, and then now they're kind of like stuck with nothing because they decided not to even report it?
In California, injured workers are required to report their injuries. There's something called a DWC1 claim form that's a form, it's a state form, it's super easy to fill out. For those of you watching, you guys can Google it. It's the first thing that comes up. When you're injured, your employer is supposed to provide you a copy of this form. You fill out the top half, they fill out the bottom half, and then it gets reported to the employer's insurance company, which officially reports the case. Um, that doesn't always happen, either because the employer uh, doesn't make the form available, doesn't inform the injured worker of their rights, or hides the ball from them. A lot of times, like we just talked about, employers do not want claims reported because it affects their insurance premiums. It also keeps an employee on the books who's potentially not working. And it's costly to them and they don't like it. And so they may try and encourage an employee to not report the case. They may make it a personal issue, especially with long term employees. I've seen employers pull out the friend card or, oh, how much this is going to cost the business. This is going to be financial trouble for us. I don't know if we're going to be able to keep going if you pursue a claim like this. I've heard all the stories. I've heard all the promises. Don't worry, I'll take care of your medical bills. I'll pay you while you're off work recovering. I've got you. We're friends. Only for 3 weeks later, a month later, whatever, the employer says, you know what, I'm done with you. Forget it. I'm not going to pay you anymore. I'm not going to reimburse you for your medical expenses. And in fact, you haven't been to work, so you're fired. And we see this all the time. And a lot of times it can be very difficult for the injured worker because during that time when they were on good terms with their employer told them to report the injury to their private health insurance as something that happened at home or while
Yeah.
helping a friend or off of work or some other reason other than work. And then it becomes documented in the medical records. And then you have, a month, 2 months, 3 months of medical treatment all saying that something didn't happen at work. And then when the injured worker actually decides to pursue the case, you have all these medical records going against them. And the presumption is, well, hey, injured worker, all these things are in your doctor's reports over and over and over again. If this wasn't how it happened, why would a doctor of all people write this in here? Are you saying the doctor's a liar? Like, that's the attitude that comes out of that. And it can be very difficult for injured workers.
Agreed. And not only that, it delays the insurance. It creates delays and it gives the insurance a reason to deny, right? If they find out that you didn't report this in the get-go. And this goes to also for minor injuries. Minor injuries can escalate. Like there's no tomorrow. Like you think, nothing's wrong. I'll be fine. And then what happens next? A month later, it starts progressing. You start getting more pain, or you start realizing there's symptoms that you didn't see prior. And it just turns into a nightmare. So it's always best to just notify your employer of any incident that could have happened. Even if you think it's going to be a small, like, oh, I'll be fine. I just need like a few days rest. It's always great to just, I don't know, put it in paper. And that's another tip we're going to give you guys in a little bit. But we're going to move on to our next section, which is what are you entitled to in workers' comp? I think that's also another big assumption that people think that they're only entitled to, I don't know, doctor care or medical treatment, right? But they don't see the other side of workers' compensation where you have, you know, all these other wage replacements, the vocational job replacement. And I want you to kind of dive into that and explain a little bit of, where that kind of leads people clueless because they don't even know what they're entitled to as far as their benefits.
Sure, we're really talking about, a limited amount of benefits. I think it's important to understand that workers' compensation was originally created as a carve out to personal injury. And what happened was the employee was no longer required to prove negligence or prove employer fault, that just any time an employee got hurt, they got these benefits. And the trade off was that the benefits would be limited rather than big damages that you would get in, for example, a civil suit for negligence. And so, really, these carve out of benefits were compartmentalized and curated in a way to ensure that injured workers were made whole, not necessarily, provided retirement benefits per se. You see someone who was injured on the, I don't know, they're riding their bicycle. Maybe they were working, making $20 an hour. A muni bus in San Francisco hits them and they get $15 million. That's not what workers' comp was created for. There's no pain and suffering per se. There's no, the benefits are limited and unfortunately very limited sometimes, more so nowadays because of things like inflation and whatnot. But when we're talking about the benefits, we're really talking about a few buckets. We're talking about medical treatment, meaning that the employer's insurance is supposed to provide all reasonable and necessary medical care to cure or alleviate your symptoms. They provide temporary disability benefits, which is a financial benefit that is designed to compensate you while you're off of work and you're still recovering from your injury and getting better. Once you've leveled off medically, meaning the doctors feel as though your condition's static, it's not going to change for better or for worse in the near future, you get permanent disability benefits, which it's a bit of a misnomer in most cases. It doesn't mean forever, it just means permanent isn't the residual disability you have is permanent. And then ultimately, if you have work restrictions and disability and maybe you're displaced from your employment, there's retraining benefits in California. It's called a supplemental job displacement voucher, as well as something called a return to work supplement issued by the state of California. And so all of those benefits really make up the mainstay of workers' compensation benefits that you're entitled to. It's a cross between vocational, medical, and financial benefits.
Right. Now, with these medical benefits, I also feel like it's important to say that injured workers shouldn't just rely on a doctor that they were assigned to, right? So say someone recently just got injured and then you have to go through the doctors of the insurance company, or your boss sends you to the actual work injury clinic, right? Which is similar to Concentra and such. So you're relying on these clinics to be out there looking and seeking for your best interest. Can you tell me a little bit about what happens sometimes when you don't know what you don't know and you're kind of blindly going into this clinic thinking someone's going to have your back, but things are off? Give us examples of what should you look out for when you're in an injury clinic, and how do you protect yourself?
So the insurance companies, most of them, have these things called medical provider networks. And it's just like your own insurance. You can't go see whatever doctor you want. If you have Kaiser, you're going to Kaiser. If you have a PPO, you have to go on their network. Otherwise, you pay huge amounts of money, right? And it's the same thing in workers' comp. They have these medical provider networks, and in order to receive care provided by the work comp insurance company, you have to go with a medical network provider. You can't just go to your neighbor, Dr. Bob, and say, hey, treat me and work comp will pay you back. It doesn't work like that. And in particular, when you first get injured and you report your injury, your employer will send you to the insurance company's kind of preferred provider. And this is the right to control that the insurance companies have at the outset of the injury before you have the chance to necessarily go to a different doctor. There's technicalities, I don't want to get into it because you can go and see a pre-designated doctor and things like that, but those are kind of the rare exceptions for anyone who's just getting injured for the first time. You're going to
Right.
go see this preferred provider. And the preferred provider for the insurance company is a preferred provider for a reason, right? They're not the insurance company's best friend because they cost them tons of money and keep injured workers off of work getting all the treatment they need forever. They're a preferred provider because oftentimes, they're limiting the exposure on behalf of the insurance company. They're getting people back to work more quickly than other providers. They're limiting the scope of treatment potentially in benefits and things like that. So it's not to say every doctor you go to at the outset of your case is going to be horrible, and I don't want to paint that picture. But you just have to be cautious about the tone and attitude of your doctor and whether or not they're listening to you and whether you feel like they're really just pushing you to go back to work and get better sooner than you feel comfortable with or that your condition necessarily warrants. I've seen a lot of people get kicked back to work way too quickly, which makes their injury way worse.
Yeah. And I think that's the part where we phrase it, you don't know what you don't know. You kind of trust that the doctor's going to want your best interest. And if the doctor tells you, yeah, you'll be fine, like you can go back to work, you don't have any restrictions set, but you truly know your body, you know what you're feeling, and you're like, I don't have strength in my arm yet to be climbing up a roof or whatever. And you kind of rely on the expertise of this doctor. And then it comes to show that he wasn't looking out for your best interests, and you listened to his advice. And now you're stuck in a pickle where now you've re injured yourself, or you aggravated that first injury. And now things are even worse. A lot of people don't even know that they're entitled to getting a different doctor, if it's within the first if it's within the specific time of your case, and it has to be within the MPN network for that insurance company. There's so many things that injured workers don't know, because it's not like you wake up one day and you say, hey, let me go get injured today, or say, hey, when I get injured, this is exactly my plan A, plan B, plan C that I'm going to do. Because for the most part, none of us know what is it like to have to go in through the system, because again, you don't wake up saying I'm going to injure myself today, right? So that's where it becomes a little bit confusing. And I also want to highlight another huge mistake that I believe people do, that it's a huge costly mistake. And you kind of narrowed it down a little bit, Bilal, which is going back to work too soon. When you go back to work too soon, because either it's pressure for your employer, because it does happen. They'll start saying, oh, you don't want to lose your job, do you? You should try to come back and, tough it out. Um, Again, you risk the re-injury of whatever it is that you were already dealing with, right? And then worst off, maybe no compensation, because for whatever reason you weren't medically cleared or it wasn't correct. So can you kind of touch a little bit on that, Bilal, as to don't go back to work too soon?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's the practical realities of life. Like, if I'm off work, my rent doesn't stop. My cat food bills, my heating, air conditioning, electricity, right, water, trash, bill after bill after bill. Right now, people have kids, sometimes working two, three jobs just to make ends meet. They can't afford to be off of work, and so, there's always that delicate balance of the fear of losing your job, losing the ability to provide for yourself, becoming homeless, balanced against maximizing your medical care in a position where you feel like you're really 100% or as good as you can be to go tackle your job. And to make
Right.
matters worse, you have the insurance company harassing you about going back to work. You have your employer harassing you about going back to work. Maybe you have an insurance preferred provider who's kind of pushing less and less work restrictions on you, despite you not feeling comfortable with those work restrictions. And I think a lot of people get pushed into a corner where sometimes they have to make that tough decision.
Yeah.
Do I go back, or do I risk termination, losing my job, having benefits cut off, and things like that? And it's difficult. There's no situation that's perfect, and I think sometimes injured workers just have to make that difficult choice. And I think as much as you may not want to go back, sometimes you're forced to. But I think it's also very important that you take opportunities when you can to ensure that you're getting a fair shake, whether that's changing your treating physician or going to a second opinion doctor, or, for example, a qualified medical evaluator if you disagree with your treating physician's findings. But I think it's always important to tackle things like work restrictions early on by ensuring you're with a doctor who you feel is working in your best interests, to ensure that you don't prematurely get sent back to work with restrictions that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because if you just disagree with your doctor's restrictions, your doctor clears you from work and then you don't go back, technically your employer may be able to terminate you for job abandonment, because they're going to say, hey, look, these are the only work restrictions we have. We can offer you modified work within these work restrictions. We have offered you modified work and you're refusing.
Yeah. That's why it's important when it starts getting a little bit difficult in that situation. And especially for the injured worker, you're already dealing with the pain, right? You're already dealing with trying to recover and going to all these physical therapy appointments if that's something that you've injured and you're entitled to. The last thing you want to do is start having to figure out, how do I fight against the doctor telling me one thing but my body feeling another thing, and then my boss telling me to go back to work. That's the point where I personally would say, hey, okay, you know what, let me get someone who's going to fight on my behalf as well, so I'm not alone doing this. And with that said, these insurance companies and people that are within the system, the doctors themselves, this is what they do for a living. They know the system inside and out. Therefore, if they're years ahead of you in the education they have within the workers' compensation system in California, then it's to your own benefit that you hire an attorney who, one, is not going to charge you right off the bat. Attorneys don't get paid because, oh, I'm hiring you and you need to pay me upfront $5,000 so I can even look at your case. Can you talk a little bit about that, Bilal, in regards to how an injured worker, if they're in the situation where they feel they're not being heard, they're getting sent back to work early enough, and they hire an attorney, how does that work?
So, attorneys in California are contingency fee based, meaning that you don't pay them hourly, you don't pay them retainer fee up front. They're all 100% paid based off what they win. which means at the end of the day, if you don't get anything, they don't get anything. And so,
Hmm.
attorneys are incentivized in California to do their best to ensure you're getting the best result possible because it benefits everyone. You
Right.
know, at the same time, attorneys, not all attorneys are created equal, right? There's good attorneys and there's bad attorneys. I can tell you, having done this for a very long time, even as a good attorney, I think I'm a good attorney. Someone might dispute that, but I
You
think I'm a
are a
really
good
good
attorney.
attorney. you know, it, the labor code, workers' comp as a system is extremely complex. I just had a trial, several days ago. It's been going on for a couple of years. And I'm still doing research and writing. I'm still looking things up. I'm still preparing briefs to present issues to the judge. We're still figuring things out. If it's complex for someone who's been in it now for 15 years, for an injured worker who's had zero experience, it can be extremely complex, if not overwhelming. And I think a lot of the nuance in workers' comp law that can be used to benefit injured workers is not something that you have the liberty to take your time with while your case is going on. A lot of times you're faced with twists and turns throughout the case that surprise you, where you maybe only have a very limited time to take action to save whatever the issue is and benefit yourself, versus you don't have months on end to look things up, to take the time to figure it out. And so and a good attorney can be there to help you navigate the system as efficiently as possible, without you having to stress and figure it out on your own when it matters most.
Right. Well, not to toot your horn, but I will. You were also kind of nominated for Attorney of the Year as well. So obviously, you know what you're doing. Not to mention Pacific Workers, the law firm. Not only are they also going to help with what you just mentioned, Bilal, but I think one of another huge setback for injured workers is the amount of time it takes to make all these calls back and forth, find the doctors, find the appointments, right? The way that your company's ran, Pacific Workers, it allows for an entire team to back up the injured worker, meaning you're not just going to get your attorney, you're going to get an entire team who's going to constantly be calling the doctor's office to make sure that those appointments are set, that you are meeting, everything that you need to. One of the biggest, I think, advantages that you have when you hire an attorney is the paper trail, right? You have someone who's essentially documenting everything along with you, right? Because it's a huge task, to keep up with conversations with doctors, with meeting deadlines, et cetera, right? So part of the system itself, on top of you getting your doctors and your medical benefits, right? All these appointments and stuff, is essentially also getting these doctor's appointments, which is not easy, right? You have to constantly make all these calls. So having an entire team back you up lifts a huge weight off your shoulders, so you can only stick to your recovery. And hey, while my attorney and their team is handling all the legal stuff and all the paperwork and all the extra calls, I don't have to stress about it. All I have to do is work on my body to feel better, and try to recover at best whichever way I can. And speaking about a team, we do have our team on the chats as well. So if you guys have questions, if you guys would love to get a consultation and just speak and talk a little bit in depth about your case, because I know it could be a little bit intimidating to share some of this information on the chats, you can go ahead and connect with one of our chat experts. Our intake specialist will take care of you. They can set an appointment for you where you can have a one-on-one conversation. We can talk about your case. What options do you have? Again, all of this is for free. I just wanted to throw it out there. And that, I guess, would give me a really good moment for you, Bilal, to kind of share with others the importance of keeping paper trails and proof of everything. Like, what is an amazing tip you can give to those watching this webinar right now as far as to what they need to jot down and what do they need to keep track of?
I mean, I think it starts at the outset of the case, especially if you're injured in a place where maybe there was no one that actually saw it. More often than not, when there's no paper trail or where there's a delay in reporting the case, the insurance companies love to latch onto that to deny the case. If you don't report the case immediately, oftentimes insurance companies will say, well, why'd you wait so long? Or they do actually conduct interviews with the employers when you do report a case, to gather more information about what their perspective was. So, it's always important to document, and again, document. If you're injured, make sure you send your boss a text, or, report the injury in writing. If there was a witness there, make sure you jot down who that witness was and where you were and at what time, what day, things like that. Ultimately make sure that your claim is just is documented. I think at the end of the day, that's what matters most.
Yeah.
I think more people nowadays, I think, are aware of that, but I still see cases that come in every day where injuries were verbally reported, and then the employer is disputing that the injury ever happened or that there was witnesses there and things like that. So, always at the outset, make sure your case is documented from the beginning. I think that
Yeah.
would be any more important.
I'm so happy you said that. It's kind of like you should paper trail this in a text and an email, because you're right. There is instances we've seen where injured workers verbally notify their employer, or they give, I don't know, a recorded statement without advice, right? And what happens is their words get twisted, or they get asked the question in a way where they're set up for failure. And then what happens? You're kind of stuck, and you put yourself in, you dug a hole for yourself. And instead of you trying to get out of it, you're only digging it deeper. So I'm excited that you shared that with us. So, one of the number one questions that we get a lot in the community of work injuries is, how much is my case worth? That's like the number one question everyone wants to know, right? Like, hey, this just happened to me. Like, how much am I going to get after? Um, and it's also important to kind of say that just because your best friend at work, your coworker wifey, or your coworker husband, doesn't necessarily mean that if they got the same injury as you, that you're going to get the same outcome as them. So I kind of wanted to touch on this in particular, Bilal. We know that all medical costs for all future care for your injury are different for every single case. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, including the settlements at the end?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to settle a work comp case. It's either a lump sum where they just buy out everything, including your medical. They say, you know what, here, Carmen, here's a check for whatever number of dollars. You're done. Workers' comp's over for you. You sail off into the sunset. Whatever you have to do is your responsibility. At the other end of the spectrum, you have what's called a stipulated award, which most people don't like. It's open medical care continuing through work comp insurance, plus the value of your disability payments actually being paid out slowly over time rather than a lump sum. Um, when we're talking about the value of a case, it's largely based on your medical as well as your permanent disability. Those are the two main factors. In every case, every injury is created differently. Like you said, you could have two different people, the same exact injuries, the same exact medical needs, the same exact earnings, all that stuff that would factor in for disability and medical. And you could have one case that settles for double than the other. And that's, highly dependent on who the adjuster is, whether they're inexperienced or experienced, how much they hate injured workers. I say that loosely, but how much they dislike claims, how much they're incentivized to defeat claims and bring the cost down versus another adjuster who doesn't really care all that much. You could have defense attorneys assigned to the case and a defense attorney who wants to fight every little issue versus another defense attorney that just doesn't care at all and lets the case just go. You could have a trial with two different judges who feel too differently, about the case, and write two different opinions about issues. There's so many factors that go into what a case is worth that you can have all these things and have totally opposite outcomes. Um, and I think
Yeah.
it's important to make the distinction about what a case might look like when it walks in the door versus at the end of the day. When a lot of clients ask me about how I value a case, what is their case worth, it's very difficult for me to give them an honest response. And
Yeah.
I don't like to lie, I don't like to make up numbers. And it's really because at the end of the day, your case is dictated by how much you recover. Once you've reached what they call maximum medical improvement, meaning you're not going to improve any longer, the doctor gives you disability ratings. The doctor talks about what your future medical is. Those aren't
Right.
things that I know, at the beginning of your case. And there's sometimes I've had cases where they've walked in the door and frankly, they probably weren't worth that much, but they had medical complications during, a surgical procedure. Their permanent disability skyrocketed, and now their case is worth, 10 times more than it was in the door, and no one would have been able to predict that.
Yeah.
And to the opposite, we've also had people who come in where they're severely injured and they've also made miraculous recoveries. And there are some things that are formulaic, different types of injuries and medical conditions that I can kind of, based on experience, loosely predict.
Yeah.
Um, but it's really, the focus when we look at cases is, how do we ensure that people are getting the most benefits, what they're legally entitled to, and that they're working with the best doctors to ensure that they're getting a fair shake to recovery. No one
Right.
asks to get injured. No one wants to be off of work getting paid temporary disability. People, they just want to feel good. And that's really the focus of the practice. But, at the outset of a case, I would say most of the time it's very hard to predict the value.
Right. It's really difficult. And it goes along with the common mistake that a lot of injured workers do, which is not understanding what they're entitled to. As long as I've been with, Pacific workers, I've seen so many people not even know what rights, they're supposed to get when it comes to lost wages or the benefits of the medical treatment and such, or the mileage reimbursement, right? A lot of people don't even know that within those benefits, you're supposed to get reimbursed for the mileage for you driving to these doctor's appointments and whatnot. And the scandalous part about it is the insurance companies are not going to tell you, hey, by the way, you're entitled to this. They're not going to tell you this, right? So that's where it comes into play, where if you have a legal team behind you, they know all of these things and like, hey, let's get your mileage reimbursement done. Hey, your lost wages are not calculated correctly. Let's fix this. Or the number one issue that I see constantly as well is um, your benefits. You're paying out benefits, right? Your lost wages. All of a sudden, they just stop because the insurance company decided to stop them and for no apparent reason. And you're just like, well, maybe I ran out of all the money that I was entitled to. Like, no, most of the times that's not the case. And you won't know what you are entitled to, what benefits you can get until you actually hired a team who knows what they're doing. So that is like a number one mistake that I would also put on the top of my list, not knowing what you're entitled to. Along with the settlements that we were just talking about and not getting the same as your best friend at work, I think another secondary most asked question would be how long does it take to settle a workers' comp? You kind of touched on this, Bilal, earlier where you were explaining that, you've seen cases where people go from not a lot of injury or not a lot of, I guess, situation or issues going on with their injuries, and then all of a sudden it escalates and vice versa, right? So understanding these time frames and giving someone an idea of how long does this take, can we kind of share a little bit on what this looks like for someone in the system?
Yeah, I mean, cases can be all over the place. Having been in practice for as long as I have, I've seen that. I think you can settle a workers' comp case at any time, pretty
Right.
much. Um, it's just about whether you're getting fair value for it. And
Right.
the earlier on in the case, the less likely it is that you're going to get fair value. If every time someone got injured, the insurance company wanted to offer $10 million, every case would settle in like 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't. Oftentimes insurance companies throw out lowball offers. They'll, try and incentivize the injured worker to discontinue their case early on just because it's going to cost them more in the long run.
Right.
But I've seen cases, literally settle in weeks, months.
Wow.
I've also got cases that I've literally been working on for 10 years.
Yikes.
Extremely complex, catastrophic injuries. And the reason why it takes so long is, the pace of the case is dictated by how long it takes you to reach maximum medical improvement for any and all body parts and systems that are being pled as part of the injury. Because when you're permanent stationary or you're maximum medically improved, you get disability ratings and you
Mm-hmm.
don't get them before then. And so
Yeah.
as long as the doctors still feel as though your condition is changing, that you're getting better or getting worse, that you need surgeries or not, that can continue to take time, especially
Right.
if that's compounded by, legal issues where maybe your case has been denied and so you have to fight through trial and appeal to get it accepted before you can even start getting treatment. And
Yeah.
we've
So I
got
guess,
cases where people really just feel like they want out, but it's just the system, it's just the process that takes long.
yeah. For sure. And I do want to remind everyone, we are going to have the live Q&A at the end of this. We're almost done, I promise you. And we're going to answer all those questions. So if you have questions in regards to, what does it look like if I take an early settlement and, what can I do after the fact? Like, please go ahead and start jotting those down. I do see a couple of people on our chats that I do want to say thank you to. Gloria, thank you for your question. We also have Sandy on there as well, who's representing the Pacific Workers team and is ready to answer some of your guys' questions as well. But yeah, there's a lot of information that we can sit here and continue to talk about. And I think my biggest take from this for you, if you're an injured worker, is sit down with someone who's going to help you find those answers to the questions you've been pondering about throughout your case, and it's free. What's the worst that can happen? You waste a couple of minutes in this consultation with someone who knows what they're doing. They can give you options, and I would do it. My dad actually was injured at work, and I was able to not understand anything as a child. And now that I'm in the world of workers' comp, I regret him not ever going to ask questions because he got screwed over so bad. And I'm pretty sure that's the case for a lot of people. You were talking about trial a little bit earlier, Bilal, and I want to dive into that next. What happens when you go to court? Can you shed light for someone who's actually about to go into trial, who's been injured at work, and they don't know what to expect?
Of course. I mean, I think it's important to understand there's a couple different types of hearings. We
Okay.
have conferences and trials. Conferences are hearings where we go and we try and informally resolve issues, talk through stuff with the judge mediating, maybe just for things like, hey, why hasn't this mileage been paid yet? Or how come you haven't authorized a doctor yet? Or haven't done this or that? Whatever the issue is, we try and work it out first. And then if we can't work it out, usually we go to trial. There's two types of trials. One's called an expedited trial, where the first hearing is the trial itself. And then there's more formal trials on issues other than benefits and medical care that are scheduled out at later dates. But trial is a little bit different than most people think. A lot of people think it's, there's a big jury box and, there's voir dire. So you have a panel of 12 juries selected afterwards and, you're presenting evidence and witnesses and all this stuff. And it's a little bit like that, minus the jury, to some extent. There's what we have are called bench trials in workers' comp, which means it's the judge that's presiding over the trial and the judge that's actually the one that's making the decision versus a jury in, for example, a civil negligence case or a criminal case that you may see. And so, there are still witnesses, there are still exhibits that are presented, there's still somewhat, I guess, guidance in terms of the rules of evidence and procedure and how things are done. It is a little more informal these days, although the WCAB, the Work Comp Appeals Board, has mandated that all trials be in person again unless there is good cause. We still have the ability to show up for conferences on something called court call, which is video conferencing, where the parties just appear wherever they are on their computer or their phone. But trials are still in person. And I think it goes a long way to help with things like establishing credibility, ensuring that witnesses are committed to coming and testifying, giving the judge an opportunity to see the witnesses in person to assess their credibility. So we still do go in person for that. I still suit up. If you're going to court for trial, it's always probably the best to dress professionally. Don't rock the sweatpants and Crocs as comfortable as I admit it is. It's not appropriate. So you always want to make sure you look your best.
Right.
But it's still, even though there's a level of informality in workers' comp, it's still a very serious proceeding.
Yeah. And I think one of the huge, I guess, perception that injured workers have, and I do want to shed light on this as well, is thinking that you're going to go up to a judge and you're going to be able to tell the judge your entire story and that you're going to be able to tell the judge, this is what I feel like I should be entitled to, blah, blah, blah. And the judge can't really force the insurance company to pay out a settlement. It's so, can you kind of share a little bit of what that looks like? Because I think a lot of people have that idea that, oh, I'm going to trial and I'm going to win my case and the judge is going to award me.
Yeah. So judges have limited powers in workers' comp. I mean, all judges have limited powers.
Yeah.
A criminal judge doesn't have the right to award you damages in a civil negligence case. They're limited by the scope of their role, and it's the same thing in workers' comp. And so, judges are bound by the labor code and what they're allowed to give you. And so, the judges from that perspective cannot award you things like money in lieu of medical care. The idea of a compromise and release in workers' comp in California is a voluntary process. The insurance company can offer to buy out your medical care, but they're not obligated to. And so, if, for example, the insurance company is offering you what they feel is an adequate amount of money to buy out your case, but you feel it's inadequate, going to trial may not necessarily help you. The
Yeah.
judge isn't going to say, "Hey, they were only offering you 50 grand for your medical care. I'm going to award you 500,000 for your medical care." Permanent disability, yes, you can go to trial on, and you can maybe do better than what they're offering depending on what the judge says, but not for the medical. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about the idea of going to trial, and that going to trial is always in your best interest if you disagree with what's being offered to you. Um, and usually we'll explain that. People kind of don't grasp that at first, but I think after they understand the process a little more, they do see and understand what it is that the judges are able to do versus what they're not able to do, and that helps generally guide people. But for your first time going through the system, I see it a lot. People just default to, well, I'm just going to have the judge decide.
Yeah.
That's not always. It's not always going to work out as people intend.
Yeah. Okay. And then this goes with our next mistake that could cost you thousands in your case, is not going or showing up or getting there late and not really taking deadlines serious. And that also includes showing up to appointments, such as a trial, such as a conference, such as logging in on the court Zoom and all of that. It's important for you to have this all written down somewhere. There are zero excuses of, oh, my dog ate my phone and I couldn't log in, or it's these little mistakes like that can cost thousands. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain, Bilal, where there's been instances per se from an injured worker or a case that you've worked. Without going into too much detail of that case itself, has there been a case of someone not meeting these deadlines or not showing up to doctor's appointments where it's cost them a lot in their case?
Yeah, I mean, a judge can compel you to attend court. Judges have contempt power for one. They also have the power to just outright dismiss your case if you don't
Oof.
attend, and they order you to.
Yeah.
Um, Missing your primary treating physician appointments that are regularly scheduled because they need to be, because they have to continue to certify you for benefits. If you miss appointments, the insurance company can potentially cut off your benefits in a time maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck, or you're in a situation where you need that money.
Yeah.
You can't wait weeks or months to get back on track. So I have seen people miss appointments. I have seen their benefits cut. I have seen them disappear in cases,
Oof.
um, only to come back months later and say, "Oh, sorry, I was busy."
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
Life was lifey.
we told you about court. You missed court. It was rescheduled another time. You were ordered to appear, and you still didn't go. You never called us back. You never texted us. Never responded to letters, emails, and they just thought, well, maybe I could just come back to this later. Too bad, so sad at that point. But we do see people who maybe don't take it as seriously as they should,
Yeah.
and that can affect their benefits or their right to just pursue a case in general.
Yeah. See, and this is the part where I say if you had a legal team behind you, it not only just falls on you, obviously, you have to show up to your medical appointments, but you have reminders. I'm pretty sure your legal team will be like, hey, heads up, you're getting an email, you're getting a text, don't forget about your appointment. If you're running late, like, hey, text someone right quick, because I know it could be really difficult to get a hold of the doctor's offices and such, but again, this is the part where you have to have and think positively of like, I need a team behind me to also kind of support me, because handling all this by yourself is not an easy task to do. So this is the part where I get to share a little bit about Pacific Workers. And of course, we are your partners in workers' comp. Proudly, Mr. Bilal and his co-founder and all of the attorneys and the entire team, okay? It's over 90 people that work at this law firm, are proudly saying we are a 98% success win rate company. We fight aggressively for any case, not just because, oh, we think this case is going to win. No, we don't care if it's, you know, whatever case, it's if we take the case on, we're going to fight for the best outcome as we can achieve. And it's one of the highest average recoveries in California, right? So 98% is a good thing. You want to be with an attorney who doesn't have bad fallout constantly because you're kind of putting yourself in jeopardy or 50-50, right? So we've talked about this below, the no upfront fees where we don't get paid as an attorney or you don't get paid as an attorney if you don't win, which I want to pick a bone with some people as well. And if you're in a workers' comp system and you feel like your attorney is not on your best, just trying to get the best for you, they're not on your best side and they're not trying to help you out as much as you wanted them to, why would they want the worst for you? And maybe Bilal, you can kind of help me understand this. If I'm hiring an attorney and my attorney's getting paid on a contingency fee, it's to my attorney's best interest to get the most out of my workers' comp case because the more I get, the more my attorney gets, right? So why would someone think my attorney is lowballing me? Like they're on the side of the insurance company. What benefit would an attorney get if you guys were on the side of the attorney? I'm sorry, if you were on the side of the insurance company?
I mean, it'd be massively illegal for a lot of reasons. We don't represent the insurance companies. We
Yeah.
represent one party. That's our client. We're not allowed to do both. It's not the real estate business. No, we get this a lot. There's been times where I've had clients give me feedback, and they ask me, whose side are you on? Sometimes our job as an attorney, well, we're called counselors, right? We
Yeah.
deliver bad news just as much as we deliver good news. And I would be disingenuous, dishonest, and not a good lawyer if I never delivered bad news.
Yeah.
And part of my job is to help navigate people through the process, good or bad,
Right.
and tell it like it is so that they know where they are on the map and they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families. And sometimes it's not good news that I'm delivering. And it's not always sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes, yes, workers' comp cases mostly result in people getting some form of medical care and or benefits and a settlement. There are times where it's not always going the way they want it to, that they're not getting all the medical care, just some of it, or that they're
Yeah.
not with the best doctor, only with a good doctor, or that the permanent disability isn't as great as they thought it would be, the amount of the settlement's not as high as they think it should be. And it's not the attorney per se that's done something. A lot of what we do is limited by the scope of the system that we're in,
Yeah.
and
For sure.
sometimes we're making the best of the worst. The system sucks. There's permanent disability pay rates have not changed since 2013 despite sky high inflation for the past 5 years, let alone normal inflation. The idea that injured workers still get saved, the payment's still the same for permanent disability as it was in 2013 now as it is in 2025 is absolutely insane. And so yeah, most settlements are hugely inadequate to compensate people for what they've gone through. But because we're limited by the benefits that are available to us in the system, we can only, we're playing with rigged rules. We're playing with, a limited scope of opportunity for our clients. And so
Yeah.
sometimes winning may still feel like losing for a lot of people.
Of
But
course.
that doesn't mean that we're on the side of the insurance company.
Never, never the matter, right?
Yeah.
Never. Okay, well, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to remind those that are in the webinar, you do get the actual free download for the book. So if you guys are following through, if you registered through our website as well, you will get the email with a notification that allows you to download our free pocket guide. And part of what makes Pacific Workers a little bit different, right? We have the best technology in our team. And I am not trying to show off or anything, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of law firms out there that are still working where they tell you to go into the office and everything they need to tell you needs to be in person. Well, guess what? Here at Pacific Workers, things are different. Not only did we write the pocket guide to the California workers' compensation, we also have superior technology. We can track your cases. You can track your cases with an app. We give you an app to download. You download your app and you can see where your case is going. You can communicate with your team 24/7. You can send them a text message. If you're not an email person, then text them. If you're not a text person, then you can call them, you can email them, and you're going to be heard. You're going to be able to be connected with your team. I think one of the biggest stress I guess, that any injured worker can live is going through a legal battle and then not being able to get the answers or not being able to get the sleep because you're like, oh, what about this? And then you try to reach out to someone and they don't answer to you, right? This is the part where you get to actually connect with the technology we have and get a hold of your team with a simple text message, just like that. The team is highly trained. Again, I've mentioned this earlier. Bilal, how many are there? Like, we're definitely over 90 at this point, for sure.
Something like that.
Right. I think
Yeah.
it's past 90. So, again, you're going to want to check out this book where we also dive with more information in regards to the injured workers and the benefits that you're entitled to. It also includes essential workers information, especially for those that still deal with COVID, because COVID is still a thing. You know, we thought COVID was going to go away and it totally didn't. And there's different types of COVID situations. There's different types of rules for that as well. Those are all on the guide. So make sure you guys check out that email at the end of the webinar that you'll be receiving shortly and download it and go ahead and share it with anyone you might feel needs this as well. So that way you guys can get the true benefits you're entitled to and understand your rights. So that's the most important part here. You want to save thousands in the sense of how to make sure you're taken care of is one, understand what you're entitled to and understand what your rights are going to be. So here are your next steps. This is what we want you guys to kind of start looking into. If you're injured, if you're whatever point you are in your case, right, in your injury claim, get a free consultation, a second opinion. Get someone to kind of answer those questions that have been keeping you up at night. There is no obligation whatsoever, just advice that you're going to get from the team, and it's free, okay? Don't forget the pocket guidebook. That's also free as well. We're not going to charge for any of that, but that's definitely something we want you guys to kind of dive into. And as I mentioned before, if one of my intake specialists can do me a favor, I know you guys are on the webinar on the back end as well, which we want to thank the entire team that's helping us put all of this together. If you guys can provide the link where someone can schedule an appointment and the phone number where someone can just call, please write that down for us in the chat so that the people that are watching the live webinar on YouTube can also see where they can get that future help. And once again, we're here for you. I think, Bilal, you always say this, right? Never try to go at this alone. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means? Don't go at the system alone.
Yeah, it's just, it's harder to reinvent the wheel, and it's harder to, you know, go back on a year's worth of progress if things have gone down the right path. And I think a lot of costly mistakes can be made at the forefront, which can make it difficult for the case to proceed in a way that's more beneficial to people as it goes along. So, it's better to start fresh and ensure you're going in the right direction from the get-go.
Agreed. You don't want to take too long to make that decision because when you take too long and you miss deadlines, which are very important in workers' comp, you can't go back and fix what's already been messed up. Sometimes it's a little bit too far out, right? Sometimes you've messed it up a little bit too much to the point where the law won't even be able to help you. So
Sometimes,
I
yeah.
think it's super important. So, all right, well, let's go into some of the chats and see what's going on here. Let's see. Um, we have a couple of questions on here, so I'll go ahead and read them to you, and then you can go ahead and answer them. So
Sure.
it says, how does California's cumulative trauma, that's a hard word for me to say, cumulative trauma rule impact workers filing claims for injuries that develop over time? Ah, that's a really great question.
Hmm.
If you have cumulative trauma, does that even affect you filing after the fact?
Yeah, oddly enough, there's some states that do not recognize cumulative trauma, which is occupational disease and illness, as a legitimate workers' comp injury. They only have specific injuries. Um, California, in that regard, is very liberal about your ability to claim injuries that slowly happen over time that are kind of indiscernible micro traumas. An example of them are wear and tear injuries. People who've been in office work for a long time, developing things like carpal tunnel or neck issues. You know, people, plumbers and electricians, knees and shoulders. Some low back. Usually it's like the framing guys of general construction, but people who are in trades, for example, may not necessarily break their back on day one, but after 20 years of crawling around in a crawl space or doing overhead work, installing fire sprinklers or electrical or plumbing and stuff, yeah, your shoulders get wrecked, your knees get wrecked, your hips, your back, they get wrecked over time. But it's not like, you fell off a ladder one day. That still happens, but it's these little things that build up over time that ultimately leave people in a really bad place. California is a state that recognizes cumulative trauma injuries, which is,
Thank
uh,
God.
it's not just physical injuries too.
Yeah.
Cancer can be a cumulative exposure issue as well. We've had people who developed occupational cancers,
Depending on where you
firefighters, first responders, things like that.
live.
Police officers have presumptions for the development of low back injuries if they wear a gun belt for 5 years.
Yeah.
There's things that recognize that, yeah, in California, we're pretty good about saying that, look, if the longer you work at something, the more likely it is that you're going to have injuries. And so we want to recognize that long-term wear and tear happens for people. So I think we're fortunate that people have that opportunity in California.
100%. And that also goes for warehouse workers, right? All that whole movement that you competitively constantly do and trying to reach those ultimate goals, right? Fast,
Shout
fast,
out to the
fast.
delivery drivers out there too, lifting 300 packages a day.
Ugh, I don't know how they do it. All right, we're going to go on to question number 2. Are there any best practices for navigating the medical provider network to ensure quality care? Oof, I have something to say before you blow. That is another good thing why you should get a legal team behind you. They know the list, they know the good doctors, they know the doctors that don't really favor the injured workers. So hint, hint, this is a good thing.
Yeah,
So
I mean, what you said kind of just it's all about knowing who the doctors are. You do this long enough, you know who the doctors are. You know the good ones, you know the bad ones, the ones that are more favorable to the insurance companies, the ones that aren't. Honestly, just the ones that have great staff. The
yeah,
ones that will, when you have an appointment, they're on time. They don't charge you to sign off on your SDI paperwork, or they always get your work status report out to your employer right away. The ones that are on top of making requests for treatment authorization. But if you've never been through workers' comp, you don't know that. If you're on your own, I mean, I suppose you could do Google search, look up, doctor reviews online at the very least, to ensure that you're getting with someone who's competent. But call around too, talk to their office, see how far out they're scheduling. The doctor that can get you in tomorrow versus the doctor that's booked out for 3 months, that might tell you something about why
mm,
they're available if they're not that spectacular. Maybe they're really good or they had a cancellation, but I don't know. You just need to do as much research as possible, because once you go down a path with a bad doctor, it can really do a lot of harm to your case.
it cost you thousands in your case, okay? Thousands. All right, we're gonna go into Gloria's question, and thank you, Gloria, for writing your question in the chats. It says, if you can get a CNR, can you treat with your own private doctor?
Yeah, I think most people prefer to do this.
Heck yeah.
This comes up a lot, right? Because people say, well, what happens if I give up my right to medical care through workers' comp? Then what? Am I going to be able to get care? There is a labor code section, it's 3751, something like that, that basically states that it's illegal for a medical provider to knowingly bill you for work comp related medical treatment. And that's why if your case is open, you go to your doctor and say, hey, I fell off a ladder, I need you to treat me. They'll say, well, go see your work comp doctor. It's not
Mm-hmm.
because they don't like you, it's not because they don't want to treat you, it's because legally they're not allowed to bill you directly for it. But once your case is closed, you're out on your own.
Yeah.
You can go see a doctor, you can go pay them. That's what the money's for. They're buying out your right to medical care so
Mm-hmm.
that you have the ability to go do that on your own.
I totally would. I would 100% jump on that, right? If I'm done with my case, if I settled already, my husband got insurance for me, guess what? I'm going to go see a doctor and try and see my best outcome possible after my injury and such. So, we have some more questions. Are there any advantages to keeping medical care open instead of settling in a lump sum?
I think for that, it depends on what your medical condition is. In workers' comp, we have something called utilization review. Basically, the insurance company has the ability to deny your care, and unless it's overturned on an appeal that you file called IMR, the care remains denied. It's not like going to your own doctor through, let's say I go to Kaiser and I say my back is on fire and I'm getting radiating pain down my leg. My doctor may send me to do an EMG study, an MRI, they'll give me a pain medication, and they schedule my physical therapy all like the same day, like clockwork. In workers' comp, the doctor has to ask for permission first, and a lot of times the care gets denied, which can make open medical care a bit of a lie, because it's not really open medical care if the care you want and needs constantly getting denied, which is
Yeah.
the reality for a lot of injured workers. And so, I generally tell people, one, keeping open medical care depends on if the insurance company even wants to buy out your medical care, for one.
Mm-hmm.
Two, whether the amount they're offering you, whether you like it or not, is good enough such that you find taking the money more valuable than keeping open the medical care.
Yeah.
If they're offering you $1,000 to buy out your medical care, but your doctor says you need a total knee replacement, keep the medical open, right?
Right.
If they're offering you 50,000 and you think your medical care is worth 70,000, well, maybe 50,000 is pretty good, and maybe you take it and run, and so it's worth it to close it. Um, but then also, lastly, it depends on what your condition is. We've had people who are quadriplegic, they're paraplegic. There's no dispute that they're going to need in-home care for the rest of their life, and they don't want to deal with that responsibility on their own. And the insurance company medically has no viable argument to say that it's not necessary. And so, them having to provide constant in-home care for the rest of someone's life is invaluable potentially, and it makes sense to keep it open.
Yeah.
Um, so there are times where people like the medical care and they do want to keep it open. I can also say that sometimes the insurance company just doesn't want to buy it out,
Yeah.
and it's just not an option for you, and you're forced to keep your medical care open. In which case, maybe you revisit potentially settling it out a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road.
Right. Which you have that option, right? You can essentially just be like, okay, I'm done. I'm over with. So that's a good, it's a good reason that you guys came to the webinar because all of this information is not something that you can easily find out there on Google, right? ChatGPT can't tell you half of this stuff either. So it's until you get a consultation, until you speak to someone who understands and does this for a living for you to truly see and lay out your cards on the table and say, is this my best deck? Is this my best play? Like, is this what I need to do moving forward? And I can't encourage this enough for you guys to truly seek just a free consultation. There's nothing to lose and so much to gain from it. We have, I believe, one final question on here, and it says some of the things that we addressed earlier in regards to the temporary disability benefits, the permanent disability benefits being paid from what we used to make back in 2000, a year of the dinosaur, I would say. um, are there any challenges or any, yeah, with the workers' compensation system in California today? Are there any proposed reforms to address those issues that you know of? Do you know something that we
Yes
don't know?
and no. The biggest challenges are always the same: is delivering benefits and medical care to injured workers in a way that makes them whole. That's always going to be a major problem because workers' comp insurance in California is a for-profit business, meaning that insurance companies are incentivized to be profitable for shareholders and not to deliver whatever is needed to injured workers. Inherently, that creates a conflict from maximizing benefits versus maximizing profits. You can't have both.
Yeah.
And I think that will always be a massive challenge until there's some sort of reform, whether it's state provided benefits, medical care, or otherwise. Um, but a major issue is obviously the value of permanent disability because that hasn't changed for nearly 12 years now, which being the mainstay, the main value of what a work comp settlement is. You can't have payments to people based on money 12 years ago with cost of living now. It's a huge letdown for injured workers. There was just legislation introduced. It was SB 555. Um, it just was being lobbied like last week. And it's the goal of SB 555 would be to put permanent disability on a similar track as temporary disability, where the benefit increases on an annual basis based on inflation data, meaning cost of living adjustments, just like Social Security.
That's great.
Um, and if that passed, that means every year there's inflation, the value of permanent disability would go up.
By like
So
30 cents. I'm just kidding.
it would make a major change, a huge change for injured workers. If that passed, it would be night and day difference over time for people, because permanent disability settlements would actually have more meat to them. They would give people more reassurance that they can close a case and have the financial stability enough to help them get back on their feet. That is a proposed reform, which we hope it passes. Another proposed reform was a statewide medical provider network. Getting
Ooh.
a doctor on the network can be difficult. Sometimes doctors are listed on the network, they're not even practicing anymore. Or, you're looking for an orthopedic surgeon and they're listed there, but they're really a dentist. Like, the data's inaccurate, it's often, old, obsolete. Maybe doctors aren't accepting patients and things like
Yeah,
that. Or maybe you're treating with a medical provider network doctor, but they get kicked out of the MPN. And so the insurance says
halfway
you have to
there.
go find a new doctor, which happens.
Yep.
And the whole idea behind a statewide MPN was that you take the medical provider network away from the insurance company. And you say, you know what, if you're on this state network, you are permitted to treat any and all work comp injuries in California within the scope of your specialty. And if that actually went into effect, that'd make a major difference for injured workers trying to seek treatment, having confidence that their doctor is not going to be influenced
Right.
by needing to stay in the network. They'd have the free reign to go see whatever doctor's listed, wherever, whenever, rather than having to comb through networks, call doctors, look for, you probably still have to do some of that stuff, but it'd be far more advantageous for the injured worker.
That would be amazing. That would totally be amazing. And you brought up a really good important point, which we kind of touched a little bit earlier, and I kind of want to rephrase again. The difficulty of sometimes finding availability of doctors or even finding the correct doctor is stressful. It's a lot of work. That's like a part-time job right there. So when you have a legal team to help you support you in that sense, you have someone, or at least at Pacific Workers, I can vouch to say that our team has a dedicated person in your case that is going to be managing all of your appointments, finding that doctor for you, rescheduling that appointment if need be, because life be lifing sometimes. And you get that all just with, the support of a legal team behind you. So you might want to think about it twice if you're still thinking, it's not even worth it. One final question below, and then we'll be done. If you've just tuned in, you can, and are looking halfway through the live webinar, you can go ahead and rewatch this entire thing all over again on YouTube. We are going to be pushing out a new webinar monthly now. We're going to be focusing on different parts of the workers' compensation system, and you definitely want to subscribe to our YouTube channel and get a hold of us if you need to, so that way you can be notified when we are going to be doing these live webinars. Janet is actually typing in, what happens if you go on a long-term disability, health insurance, or job, and can you change your lawyer?
So first question, or the latter part, yes, you can always change your lawyer. Your lawyer may file a lien on your case, and it's not to say that they're gonna, come garnish your bank account or wages or anything like that, but they want the fair amount of the work that, well, they want to be paid for the fair amount of work that they've done on your case. So, if your lawyer has spent 2 years on your case and they've done a lot, they want to get compensated relative to whatever the end award is. Typically, if you settle the case yourself, the judge will withhold 15%, which is standard attorney fee, and make you work out whatever agreement you can with your lawyer, all or part of that. If you hire a new lawyer, it's your new lawyer's job to basically take the fee and then fight with your old attorney about how much they're entitled to. And sometimes it's pretty formulaic, sometimes it's not. It depends on what's done to the case. But if you have a new lawyer, you don't have to necessarily worry about paying any more money than you would just with one lawyer. And you're not the one that has to actually fight it out over the fee. Your new lawyer will take care of that for you.
Great.
So that's easiest question to answer. The next question, I'm not so sure what the question is. You can go on long-term disability. Some people have private policies outside of workers' compensation. Some people have employer-sponsored policies or paid policies where there's credits for temporary disability. Health insurance, same thing. It depends on what context you're asking. Some people, despite it being illegal to knowingly bill you for medical care outside of workers' comp, still go to their own doctors, and the doctor will still bill them or still provide them the medical care. Sometimes, honestly, it's helpful. My client needs an MRI and it's getting denied through work comp insurance, and they're like, "Hey, Bilal, I can go get this done through my doctor. My copay is like $10 or whatever. It's super reasonable. You want me to go get the MRI?" Hell yes, go get that MRI. I'll pay you back. It's helpful to your case. We're a team. Let's work together on this.
That's awesome.
But I'm not sure how much I understand the question here. But if you have questions, more info about this, I'm happy to chat with you or one of my people.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah, and you guys can go ahead and call the team at 800. I'm going to be typing that up, 800 606-6999. That is where you can call. The intake specialist will guide you through all of this. You'll be able to get some of those questions pondering in your head answered. And most importantly, you'll be able to get a lot of information from our guide as well. So if you haven't downloaded the Pocket Guide, make sure you check your email as soon as we're done. And then you can go ahead and click on that link, and you will be able to download it directly on your phone, on your computer, on your iPad, wherever it is that you want to have this information available. We actually have hard copies as well in the office, and if you are willing to do the drive, or you want us to mail you out one because you're not so tech savvy and you're just like, yeah, I would rather have a hard copy, then we can totally do that as well. You can send us a private message on YouTube, reach us out on Instagram, Facebook. I mean, we are everywhere. We're even on TikTok. So there's no excuses. Time for you to get your game back on. Time for you to win your case. Time for you to master your workers' compensation claim. We are here to help you every step of the way. We're Pacific Workers. Once again, it was a good pleasure having you with us in this live webinar. Bilal, thank you so much for your time.
Of course.
And we will catch you guys on next month's webinar. Thank you. Okay, I think we're stopped.